There's like a couple more chairs here. No? Okay. So for this next session, we're looking at fake news and the MSM in Singapore. We have with us Teo So Lang, former lawyer, former political detainee, member of Function 8, Dr. Thum historian, whom I will ask now to state your credentials.
Oh man. Okay. So the fundamental. Okay. So I'm a research fellow in history. I'm a historian. I'm a member of the University of Oxford. The exact title I can never remember. Visiting fellow of the School of Anthropology and Museum Ethnography. I'm coordinator of Project Southeast Asia, which is a project of the University of Oxford. And what has really annoyed me about this whole issue about the credentials is there's a difference between describing what you do and your exact title, and somehow in that difference, that's where the select committee and people online have somehow accused me of misrepresenting myself. You know, so for example, when you're an academic and you talk to people who aren't in academia and you give a title and you say something like, lecturer, research fellow, reader, so on and so forth, you tend to get blank looks. So as an academic, you get used to saying, I'm a history professor. And that is an accurate description of what you do. But of course, I never claimed my title was history professor, you know? And that's, and that therein lies where all this fuss has been about. So Oxford has been fantastic. They've come out and they have really made very clear, yes, I'm a member of the university, yes, I have a doctorate in history, yes, I research history, yes, I'm part of the university, you know, and I hope that settles all of that, but it's been such a silly debate to have, and of course no engagement about the actual substance of what I wrote, all about, you know, is Dr. Thum, has he misrepresented his credentials or not?
Yeah, so because the substance of what you wrote was actually only very briefly touched upon in your 6-hour marathon session. They focused instead on just one tiny aspect of your submission. Why do you think they did that?
You have to ask Mr. Shankar. I don't know. When the press interviewed me afterwards, I also said I don't know why he did that. You know,
So it was really unexpected. You didn't expect it at all.
I feel very disappointed by this whole, recent state of affairs. I know So Lang has said I was naive, and yeah, I guess. Well, not naive. What did you say on your Facebook page? You said, look, I mean, the Kirsten and I, right, really believed that the government was putting on an exercise to legitimate what would inevitably be, a fake news law. I mean, Shan said was a year ago now, it's a no-brainer. But we also, in this exercise of legitimation, we believe that they would allow people to actually express their views and then either, mock us, condescend to us, ignore us. But once you have this select committee and once you have the views, then the government can say, hey, we let you guys talk, right? When they pass the eventual fake news bill, we complain, they say, hey, we let you guys talk. We had a select committee hearing. If anyone around the world complains, they'll say, look, we went through this whole process, right? So they were moving towards a process-based way of justifying whatever they want to do anyway. And, governments around the world do that all the time, right? It is sadly very normal. But it is an opportunity, because if a government offers you a chance to practice democracy and be part of a democratic process, you have to take it. If you don't take it, then they say, well, then why should we give you any sort of democratic consultation in the future, right? And that's what Kirsten and I believed, and we thought, okay, never mind if they mock us, never mind if they ignore us, at least a process is starting and they're moving towards this process. And if we participate, and if we get all these other people to participate, that will then make it harder for them not to do this process in the future. And slowly, bit by bit, stone by stone, we build up, our democracy. And that was the goal. So until my hearing, it seemed like that was the direction it was going, right? But of course, then my hearing, I feel that they delegitimized the whole legitimization process with what happened. So it was that was why it was so shocking to me.
So the reason why we put the two of you together is because in both your submissions, you raised this issue of the powers that be engaging in the creation of fake news. So long you didn't get to explain your point because you were not called in.
Yes, Function 8 did a submission, and we volunteered to appear if we would be called. And we did this submission because of the excitement of Kirsten and DJ and Ken, and everybody was so excited to get into this democratic mode. and so we thought, okay, Function 8 being Function 8, we will also put in our 1 cent worth. And that's what we did. And we only raised 2 points. The first point is, if you talk about fake news, it's been there all the time, it's been used all the time, and the biggest culprit would be the government itself. So what's the big deal? So some of us in Function 8 have gone through this 1987 process, and so we were the victims of fake news. And so the first point that we raised was the number of fake news published by the government against people who were arrested in 1987. I can show you some. 16 held in security suit. This one, big headline, pro-clandestine communist network. And this came out on the 22nd of May 1987, which is 1 day after we were arrested. Then a few days later, we have 16 arrested linked to Marxist Tan Wah Piao. Big headline. And then we have this big one in June. Archbishop accepts evidence, and here the government said subversives won't be allowed to use religion as cover. So can you imagine, we were there in the cold room, not knowing all these things were in our newspapers. If I had known that these were in our newspapers, you think I would cooperate so nicely in detention? I think I would have a very different view of what happened. But the reality is that we were smeared completely and we didn't know. And this is just only about a month. Imagine we were going through all this. Even until today, we are still stuck with being called as subversive. Sometime in 2011, 16 so-called subversives issued a press statement. And the government again denied that we were innocent of our acts. They again called the 1960s people that they were involved in subversive activities which posed a threat to national security. And of the 80s, this is what they said. The 16 ex-detainees were involved in a Marxist plot to subvert and destabilize Singapore. This is 2011, and they were still harping on the fact that we were subversives. So coming back to our submission, we were prepared to go and talk about all this. Unfortunately, they didn't call us. The other point that our submission made was this about the Singapore Herald. Singapore Herald was a paper very popular in the 1970s, but it was shut down because of the government accusation is that they were involved in black operations. Black operations meaning the shareholders were foreigners. One of them was the chief minister of Sabah and a diplomat in the Malaysian circle. And the other was a businesswoman who was then a publisher, a very noble, rich businesswoman who invested in the Singapore Herald. Now the government accused them of black operations, which is that they were manipulating Singaporeans, or rather even the editor-in-chief then was not a Singaporean but a Malaysian, that they were making use of this paper and therefore needed to be shut down. And within 2 years, the paper died. Not that it didn't have the support of Singaporeans. In fact, many Singaporeans supported them. I was a student in the university. I went around selling the Herald. And I think lots of other people also did that. But there was no chance to survive.
Interestingly, Singapore Herald was raised in the Green Paper as one example of foreign interference, foreign influence. But going by what you just said, that would be misinformation, disinformation, wouldn't it?
Precisely.
In the Green Paper.
Precisely, because they keep harping on this black operation, that we felt that it is good to have a clarification on this matter. Now, if you want to read this whole history, Francis Yao has written a book on it. It's called The Media Enthrall, and he has gone through it in great detail about the media being enthralled, being subdued, as early as 1986.
So PJ, you were called and you were made to answer questions, obviously. And one of the things that everyone noticed during the process was that they didn't let you go into detail. You kept wanting to nuance your answers, and you kept getting cut off. I think just yesterday you released a rebuttal with a few key points. Maybe you want to run us through the various points that you brought up in the rebuttal yesterday.
Well, the rebuttal, first of all, I strictly limited to points raised in the hearing. Right? I wasn't sure if it was within the scope of the select committee to go into all of the thousands of files that I've been through, and anyway, because they cited my article, so I included that as an attachment, and hopefully they will include it in the final report or whatever that finally comes out about the hearing. But in my follow-up submission, which I was at actually at the invitation of Mr. Shanmugam, if you remember, there were various points. He said you can submit this later. I made 3 general points, and the first one was that the accuracy of my work was not questioned, right? And in particular, Mr. Shanmugam focused only on a few paragraphs and one sentence in particular that he went on and on and on about. And at one point he insisted that you should have. He said to me, you should have reworded this basically. And I said, well, but the sentence is based on 2 different documents, and you've only cited one. And so we went back and forth on that, and he kept saying, just based on this one document, your sentence should be reworded. And I said, but the sentence is based on 2 documents. And then, of course, at one, it went on, and then the chairman then intervened and said, Dr. Thum, just answer this question, and then we'll move on. So I was like, fine, okay, then just based on this one document, it should be reworded. But of course, then that statement has then been taken out of context and stretched to say I accepted that my work. Parts of my work should have been reworded, or even that I accept that what I do is misleading, my work is misleading, which I never said and I never agreed to. So I make very clear in my follow-up statement that this was a hypothetical that I was forced to answer by the chairman, and that I answered it, and it only applies to this one document. And then I quote from the second document to show how the second document reinforces my point that my sentence is correct. Right, so that's the sort of first major point I make. The second major point I make is to address the sources that Mr. Shanmugam presented in his hearing, and they fall into several categories. The first category is basically hearsay, right? These are propaganda works issued by former members of the MCPs, or ABL, some of whom we've never heard of, right? Out of a press in Hong Kong whose entire goal is to propagate the MCP side of history and to cement the MCP's position in the historiography and the history of Malaya. So it is very hard to use these sources with any sort of confidence, right? And these people are all incredibly obscure, and by comparison, for example, Mr. Shanmugam didn't bring up biographies by people who actually were involved in the Barisan. Dr. Bo Supai's book, for example, is available right there at the back, not brought up. Right? Fong Swee Swan's book, not brought up. The interviews that Lim Chin Siong has done, not brought up. The interviews also by the members of the old guard around Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, there's many interviews, those were not brought up. So we don't have anything, he didn't present anything from people who were actually involved. And that is also the second category, which is people like Chin Peng, Yu Choi Yip, Fang Chuan Pi. And this was even more frustrating because he'd show an excerpt and I'd say, look, it says right there that they don't know what's going on in Singapore, or that they have been completely cut off from Singapore, or that the MCP's operation in Singapore has been smashed. And we just skip over those lines and focus on other lines. And that was a major part of why I was getting very peeved with him, that he was reading stuff that openly contradicted his thesis and would just ignore it. And then he'd accuse me of cherry picking. I was like, just read it. So that was the second issue, the sources, and of course I dealt with the whole discussion of Lord Selkirk's memo and explained how I use it, and clarified some of the issues around it, and how I'm very confident in my interpretation. And of course, there's a lot of history behind what Selkirk wrote. Right? Selkirk was under huge political pressure from London to agree to the arrest and find a basis for it, because the arrest, as I mentioned in the hearing, had already been predetermined between the Colonial Secretary Duncan Sands, Tunku Abdul Rahman and Lee Kuan Yew in a meeting in London several months before all of this happened. So Selkirk, his position was the arrests are going to make things worse for the UK. Right? It wasn't that he was so principled that no, these arrests are wrong. His position was the arrests are going to make it more difficult for the UK in Southeast Asia and around the world, and especially in the wake of the Suez Crisis, which really changed Britain's standing around the world and showed both its hypocrisy and its weakness. Right? So Selkirk's position was, we shouldn't do the arrests, it'll make things worse for us, but he was under a lot of pressure, and that is reflected in his memo right after the Brunei Rebellion. Then of course they don't hold the arrest because Tunku and Lee Kuan Yew can't agree on who to arrest, because Lee Kuan Yew wants a lot of people to be arrested, and Tunku's like, no, only arrest people that we have to arrest, which also substantiates the argument that these were political arrests. The holding collapses, which again, if this is a real security threat, right, why did the original coal store in late December collapse? Why did they wait till February to then remount coal store? Right? And by which time Selkirk had backed away from that position. So there's a whole context to what Selkirk was saying in his memo, which also, I point out in my work, is 3 pages and 6 lines deal with this security, the Barisan now communist controlled, and we have evidence that they may potentially one day take up arms. But the rest of it was all about, this is a political issue. If we don't agree to the arrest, we jeopardize Malaysia, the Tunku will be upset with us, we won't be able to protect our interests in the future. And so the memo that he focused on, right, the telegram, also reinforces my point that the whole thing was political. See, so all of this was not, I couldn't say any of this in the hearing. And instead, we focused on, just very narrow slices, cherry pick here, cherry pick there to call it out. And so the third part of my submission was just follow-ups, because Mr. Shanmugam asked for follow-ups both on the Hockney bus riots and Operation Coal Store, so I submitted documents that explained my position on those things.
Does anyone have any questions at this point? Yes.
the questions at the front, I think. Then we'll go to the back. Okay.
Can you also talk a little bit about the open letter signed by the group of academics? Who started it? How is it now?
Oh yeah, so my colleague Lee Jones, who did a doctorate in history at Oxford and is now at Queen Mary University of London, and I think he also, sent the cover letter to it when it was eventually sent in, wrote to me and he said, I've seen the video, I'm furious, I'm so proud to know you, what can I do? And I said, well, Lee is someone who's very experienced at campaigning, so I said, do what you think is best, do what you see fit, and I think a show of solidarity, as Jason was mentioning earlier, solidarity is very important, so this is what he chose to do. So he wrote this, he put it up online, he organized it. My involvement was chiefly when he asked me, can you tell me who do you know in academia, who are your friends, so I gave him a list of emails. But otherwise he organized the whole thing, all right? But of course he did contact me to make sure it wasn't going to make things worse for me, right? He didn't want to get me in more trouble. And I said, no, I think solidarity is really, really important, and I would really appreciate the show of it. So yeah, that's the whole story.
Gentleman behind? Oh, it's a lady. Lady behind.
Hi, I'd like to ask a question about it's on foreign influence. That accusation is commonly used by the PAP to discredit those the party wants to smear. So my question is, has there been a counter to the PAP that the party itself is under heavy foreign influence itself through foreign investments or gaining inspiration from foreign institutions, that sort of thing? Because can you point us to such counterings, because I haven't come across any myself.
I don't think so. I think there's a great difficulty there because, of course, we don't know for a fact that it would be very hard to substantiate these things due to all the secrecy laws in Singapore. And if you can't substantiate it, then you open yourself up to lawsuits and things like that, right? So this is a general problem in Singapore with accountability and transparency. It's very hard to hold our governing institutions or people to account when we don't have enough information. And there's things we all suspect, but how do you substantiate it? So I don't know if other people have tried. I think this whole charge is ridiculous, and I think Singaporeans are smart enough to know that Singapore is an open society, open country, that we have so much foreign investments, foreign funding for all sorts of things, that this sort of charge is ridiculous. And you look at by comparison, when such charges are made in, say, in Hungary, for example, Open Society had to, is considering pulling out. In Singapore, nothing, right? People just rolled their eyes at it. And the support I've gotten every day, every time I go out, people will come up to me and thank me and congratulate me. It's been overwhelming. It's actually made me a little afraid to go out because I'm a bit introvert. I'm very introverted, and so all sorts of places people have expressed a lot of support and no negativity, right? Of course, I don't include stuff online because I don't look at stuff online, and I don't feel that's completely representative of majority opinion in a way. I think Singaporeans are much smarter than that. So governments everywhere around the world, use this rhetoric, right? This is one thing I've actually I learned at the Scholars at Risk Global Congress, where people were talking about how academia was under attack all over the world, and all these stories I was hearing out of the Middle East, out of Eastern Europe, out of China, out of India. It's the same tactics, and also the same line about sovereignty, foreign influence, the nation under attack, our values under attack. So it's a very common tactic, and I think people are smarter.
Casey?
Okay, yeah, I'll just speak loudly. Responding to the first statement you made about your reply, the interesting thing now is that what is being picked up is your remarks on the Hockley riot, Hockley bus riots. And I have a question about that. What is being said is that it was the TAP rather than the MCP that was, if anyone, instigating the riots. Now, the question I have is this: from a very long time ago reading of the Battle for Merger, was this not the riots where Lee Kuan Yew made the very strong point that the communists, look what terrible people they are. They paraded this injured rioter, didn't bring him to the hospital, and as a result he died. And they martyred him for a political cause instead of sending him to the hospital. That was that a Hockley bus riot incident?
Yeah, yes, that is in reference to
Right. So the thing is, so this is a very, very strong myth of this is a very strong narrative that Lee Kuan Yew has put out.
Yeah.
But what are you saying now? Because you're saying that the PAP instigated that, but the PAP at that time, of course, was both the left and the right. So what are you saying about
Yeah,
the
actually,
Hockley bus
I'm
riot?
very surprised you picked up on that, because the issue that I was responding to that was brought up in the hearing was that I had argued that the Hockley bus strike was not instigated by the MCP, right? I had made no claims as to who it was instigated by. And so when I responded to it in my follow-up submission, my emphasis was on showing that the evidence in special branch, and you notice I quoted two, top secret, not just top secret, but guard, right? Which means documents that must be guarded. It's not even top secret, it's above that. Two special branch reports on the political security situation, in Singapore at the time, and I also quoted a bunch of internal reports by security officials. And my goal was simply to show that it was the opinion of the security experts that the MCP was not involved at all in the Hockley bus strike and the ensuing riot. Right? So I just quoted what they said, and their opinion was that this was a political strike instigated by the People's Action Party for political gain. Right? And again, I don't know how much time we have because this is nuance, this will need some explanation about the whole situation back then. But my intent was not to then accuse the PAP of anything, but rather just to show this is the evidence that is in Special Branch itself that says that they were very sure the MCP had nothing to do with it, right? And that was just what I was responding to. So I don't know if people want me to go into the Hockley bus riots because that's another lecture.
That's another,
Right? Yeah.
At some point, you'll be very interesting. Sorry?
He says we have 6 hours.
You can take PJ out for dinner after this and then grill him for 6 hours, yes or no?
Listen to my podcast. There's an episode on the Hockley bus riots, and I also make the point in my podcast, right, that how you understand the riots actually depends on your values, and how you interpret the history of the riots depends on your values. Because if you believe in peace, security, stability, as the most important thing, then you're going to see the facts one way. You're going to interpret the facts one way. But if you believe in human rights, labor rights, that these people, the bus workers of Hockley, were being terribly screwed over, and they had the right to strike to protect their jobs and their livelihood, then you'll see it another way, right? So I call that episode of the podcast the Hockley bus litmus test, because it really shows how a same event with an agreed set of facts can actually be interpreted very differently. And to respond to Casey's point about the student, it wasn't Lee Kuan Yew who made that point originally. It was the Colonial Secretary William Goode, who later became the governor, in the Legislative Assembly who made that point. Lee Kuan Yew got up and rebutted that point, right? And pointed out that, for example, the people who brought this poor kid into hospital were then arrested and released and re-arrested, even though there was no evidence against them, as part of a more broader point of police excess, police brutality even. And he only adopted the British line much later, years later in telling that story.
I'm going to bring sorry, I'll ask, I just want to ask Solang a couple of questions and then I'll open it up to you guys again, okay? So Solang, just now you ran us through, all the documents and all the instances where the MSM or the government has generated fake news and it's had a devastating impact on quite a number of people. Has there been any response in all these years to the books, the articles, the seminars that you've held?
Well, the first response was in 2011 when 16 people signed, 16 of those who were arrested throughout the years from the 1960s to 87. We signed a statement denying that we were subversives or anything like that, and the government actually responded. And after 2011, I think even before that, Comment in Our Sky, there were books already written and published by Dan Jin-Hui, who was a lawyer and a self-made historian. Yeah. He published a lot of, he was the one who started publishing documents and books of the left. And after that, I think there were several books denying that we were subversives. But there were so many, throughout the years, we read this, we get angry. That's how we issued a statement in 1988 denying the government's accusation against us. And for that, we again got rearrested. Those who signed the statement.
I remember when I interviewed you once, during a very long interview a couple of months ago, you said that when they arrested you, you didn't really even know what a Marxist was.
Yeah, that's true. I'm that ignorant.
So then, what was your reaction when that happened?
Well, the case officer it was a time when they served me with the papers, the grounds of detention, and the ground generally states that the bunch of us use Communist United Front tactics to try and subvert the government using violent means or something like that. I looked at the paper. It was, I think, in the evening when I was called to be served with this paper, and I looked up at him after reading Communist United Front, and I asked him, Mr. Lim, what is Communist United Front? And he was like shocked that I didn't even know what this term is. I mean, it's true, I was that ignorant in 1986, 87.
Earlier on, during the period that you were covering PJ, there were communist sympathizers and there were fellow travelers. That's not a dispute, right? So, my sense when I watched the long exchange between you and Minister Shanmugam is that your definitions differed. He had a set idea of what the word communist meant, and you wanted to qualify it a little bit more. Is that right?
Initially, yes, but if you watch the 6 hours, he shifts quite drastically, which leads me to wonder what he was trying to do in the first place. So at the beginning, he seems to have a certain definition in mind, but then when I said that, well, when he asked me right at the beginning, was there a Communist United Front in Singapore? And I said, well, if the definition includes Lee Kuan Yew, then yes, right? And then after that, he backed away from that, from talking about specifically a Communist United Front. And in the course of our exchange, he went all over the place until right at the end, right? He actually said that, and I'm paraphrasing here, I can look up the exact quote if you like, but the existence of a conspiracy doesn't mean that there were people receiving instructions. It could have been a far looser arrangement, people operating autonomously. And I said, wait, the lack of a conspiracy proves there's a conspiracy? What are you talking about? And then he was, he was taken aback and he was like, I know exactly what I'm talking about, and then he couldn't even So I really don't think he has a specific definition in mind, but I'm glad that at least he conceded that Lee Kuan Yew was in active collaboration with the MCP, and that there isn't necessarily evidence of any sort of coherent conspiracy, that people could have been actively... Actually, yeah, there was another point where I said, you're finally getting it, right? That there are people, there are so many people, there's a wide spectrum of beliefs, and that many people are acting independently of each other. And that does not mean, even if some of these people are communists, we know that they're a tiny minority based on special branch arrests and the seized documents from the MCP. But B, it doesn't mean that there's an existence of any sort of communist conspiracy, that they're acting on any orders. In fact, we can demonstrate quite clearly that even people we now know to be communists, Wang Zhifeng, for example, Chan Sam-Win, the PM's political secretary, was actually acted in against the MCP line, and because he had no contact with the party for years, so he was just doing what he thought was best, and it ended up being in complete opposition to what the MCP wanted. So there's all this, there's plenty of evidence. I should point out, you mentioned Marx. Today is Marx's 200th birthday. So will all of you join me in a moment of silence?
Dr. Paul has a question.
Would you like to?
Yes, my question is for Dr. Thum. My first question is, during your select committee hearing, you mentioned the word Chin Peng came up quite often. And I think you said that you didn't think that he was a very reliable source. And that because memoirs are quite self-serving and he didn't know what's happening in Singapore. And I think that probably did a lot to damage your credibility, especially among lay people. So can you explain and clarify a bit more about what you said about references to Chin Peng? My second point is this. I think it wouldn't have escaped you that the open letter was signed by plenty of foreigners and not very many locals. What do you think this represents? Is there some kind of a message that's being sent here to you or to the government? Thank you very much.
Okay, on your first point, I don't think it's damaged my credibility, but again, I have no idea of what in general the public think. There's no survey or anything, because this is a point that's been accepted. Other academics came out and Sai Simin, for example, posted on the Facebook page all the problems with Chin Peng's account of his history, right? And in general, the issues with his work are that A, he's telling one side of the story. B, he's relying very much on memory because, of course, the MCP didn't keep records. C, he's also relying very much on other works that have been already published at the time that he wrote his book, which was in the early 90s. And also this was 1993 was the first round of declassified documents from the UK on coal store. But of course, he wasn't looking at coal store. He was looking. So the UK has a 30-year rule, right? So from 46. So documents on the emergency started coming out in the 70s. So he was reliant very much on these early rounds of declassifications, which didn't include a lot of the more sensitive documents. So when I talked about Chin Peng, this was on the back of a lot of existing analysis of Chin Peng already that had come out about his work, about the reliability of his work, and we accept that it is one source of Singapore history, not Singapore history, Malayan history, right? That he gives his perspective, but that perspective then needs to be put in context with all the other perspectives, including the British documents which were created at the time, with newspaper accounts, with other personal accounts. So it's simply one perspective. Okay, so that's one issue regarding Chin Peng, right? But this is also about the Malayan emergency. If you talk about Singapore, that's a completely different thing, because Chin Peng, in his book, and in the excerpt that Mr. Shanmugam flashed up, Chin Peng says, we lost contact with Singapore, we didn't know what was happening. In other bits of the book, right, because I have read the book despite what Mr. Shanmugam was trying to portray me as, perhaps, I don't know, is that we have lost contact with Singapore, we don't know what's happening in Singapore. He's working through a lot of intermediaries. Special branch also, in the special branch files, it clearly says there has been no contact between the Singapore Town Committee and the MCP Central Committee, right? There are attempts to re-establish links. I think it's even the one of the police intelligence journals I just released yesterday actually says that. I think it's either April or May. You can look it up, it's all there. But it's very clear there is no contact. They're trying to re-establish contact, but there is no contact.
But I think
Yes.
the Shanmugam's response was that this shows you're not well organized. Remember? There was some point when he said
Yeah, that was right at the end,
Right.
right? When I had pointed out that there was no links, and he
That's right.
finally conceded that there was no links. Yeah,
Yeah.
there was a lot of chaos at this time, right? This is a very turbulent time in which there's a whole wide spectrum of people with different beliefs, and who are all trying to fight for anti-colonialism and the future of Singapore. My work is actually Cold Store. This is a nice question. Cold Store is a very small part of my work. My work's about identity and conceptions of Malayan identity, especially because when the British came back after the war, it was known already, they had made it clear, decolonization is happening. So for the next decade, the next 20 years, it became, what is Singapore going to be after decolonization? And that framed a fascinating discussion, debate, contestation of identity, right? And that's what is so exciting, because for me, this also is relevant to us now as we move forward into an era where people who remember colonialism, our colonial period, our Malaysian period, are slowly passing away, fading from the scene. What does it mean for us to be an independent country? And you see all these echoes, right? If you read Faja, right, from the 50s, and the ideas they put forward about our identity, these are echoes of the things we're talking about today. This is all fascinating, but I'm digressing, right? My point is, Chin Peng doesn't know what's going on in Singapore. That is well established. To bring up Chin Peng as a source on Singapore and ignore the British special branch documents is simply foolish, right? Why would you? As a historian, I wouldn't do that. I would rely on people who are here on the spot. Again, you don't talk about Chin Peng, you talk about, say, the plan, right? He was here. And his document, even the excerpt that was shown from his, admitted that he was the only cadre left. Special branch document says there's one cadre left in Singapore, actively working, and that's the plan. There's so much evidence from Singapore, in Singapore, by people on the spot who were participating actively. And if you focus on Chin Peng and ignore all this other stuff, right, then really, what's the point? So I hope that clarifies. Would you like, if you want to answer?
I don't want to hear enough things.
Okay.
I just want to hear about the second.
The open letter.
That's right.
As I mentioned in the past, I was working at NUS, and I was told by someone in confidence that I can't work in Singapore anymore. Now, if that can happen to me, it can happen to everyone else. And so, if people, I'm not surprised that people who are working in Singapore experience that fear and exercise self-censorship. And I can tell you that there are Singaporean academics and academics in Singapore who've come up to me, messaged me privately with messages of support, but they apologize because they cannot sign that open letter, right? Because it would jeopardize their jobs. And I respect that, and I know what it's like in Singapore. So, yeah. Sure.
Dr. Paul.
Just to add to that, I'm told by a friend of mine that it is against the terms of the contract to sign the petition. So the person didn't sign. I don't know whether this is true.
Yeah, okay, good timing. I did sign the letter. I was the second last person to sign the letter. And nobody told me not to sign the letter or to sign the letter. But the spirit of self-censorship was so strong that I didn't put my NUS affiliation. I put an academic society that I'm connected with. And I was very impressed that Bertha felt the need to justify why she didn't sign the letter in her column. You said you have your own platform, right? Yeah, which is good. But anyway, my question actually relates to this whole topic of fake news. And I wonder if we are missing the forest for the trees, so to speak. Because, you know, we know that the chairman of Temasek Holdings in 2013 went public and said that he did not believe in the grounds of Operation Spectrum. And that's the reason why he resigned from cabinet 5 years later. And then, you know, as Karen George has pointed out, the most egregious case of fake news has been the case for the Iraq War. And nobody has been punished for that, despite the disaster of the Iraq War and the birth of ISIS. So essentially, governments all around the world are going to get away with fake news and with calling anything that they dislike fake news. So I wonder whether we, by going into the details, we're losing the main point, is that basically fake news is just a smokescreen for governments everywhere, and not just in the East, but also in the West, of trying to control the narrative. And so maybe we need to step back a little and ask this question, is this just neoliberal or totalitarian or authoritarian? It's just another means for them to control us. And should we just look at another way of looking at it? Thanks.
Central thrust of my submission, you know, I covered a few of the other points that other people were bringing up, but the central thrust of my submission was, what happens if it is the government producing fake news? How do we deal with that, right? And that is what really worries me. Because, you know, our politicians right now, I have no doubt that they're honest and intelligent and well-meaning, right? Their values, I think, I disagree with. Their policies, you know, I think can be better. But what happens if you pass all these laws and then someone crazy in the future, someone incompetent, gets hold of the reins of power and uses a fake news law, weaponizes it? And what happens if someone like Donald Trump becomes prime minister, right? How do we stop that person? And that is a real concern for me. That is, you know, I think that is a far more important scenario. And, you know, I think, Paul, you're absolutely right. This is the big danger. Because how do we as citizens resist a government which weaponizes fake news against us? So this is what I had hoped to talk about in my submission. And you know, as I've argued, I believe that fake news has been used against the people of Singapore in the past, right? I don't know if this current government has. I don't think it's engaged in any particularly egregious use of it compared to, say, Spectrum. But the possibility is there. It's happened in the past. It could happen in the future, and by far worse people, you know, far more incompetent people, and that's the big danger.
Solon? Does anyone else? Yeah. The gentleman at the back. Sorry.
Right, this is my question directed to all three. Okay, so we've been having all these debates about press freedoms and fake news and so on. But I'm just wondering that we definitely have to move beyond discussion to actually take action in the real world to show the government, to show the PB government that this is what we stand for and these are the things that we will not stand for. So at this point I'm thinking that the most drastic thing that citizens can do is actually vote for the opposition come the next election. That will be the next. Not probably increase the opposition majority in parliament and reduce the PAP. I guess that would be the most drastic thing that citizens for us that we can do, since the government is not really at the moment the government is not really receptive to our comments and our feedback. So do you think there's a less extreme or in between sort of way that measures that we can actually or actions that we can take beyond voting for the opposition?
Well, well, if they can vote for the opposition, of course it's good. I wouldn't discourage that. As far as what people can do, I think the young activists today are very different from people like us, me in the 1980s. There was a total lack of solidarity then, and there was no internet. So we were very much left to rot and die wherever we were, and we just have to try and help to save ourselves. But today, I see a very clear difference between this generation and the past generation. You see, after the select committee hearing, the activists are still up and about. They haven't died. So it is a very good sign, and they will continue to, if they continue, it's a question of stamina also. If they continue to act in this way, I think the government will really have a very big headache. We can do very little, but by the fact that you don't do anything, it's already an acceptance of defeat, and the government has already won.
I think, for me, the question was, how do I come back and participate and help make things better? And my answer to that was new narrative. But I really encourage everyone to find their own way of making things better, right? And pushing the envelope, pushing our society forward. And I think it's far more effective and vibrant if everyone commits themselves to doing what they're best at or what they are inspired by. I really don't want to tell people what to do. I really don't want people to invest so much in the leadership of a single person or party or entity. I think our society, the direction our society should go, is where we are all empowered to aspire for a better society. And there is a very strong argument for, a constructivist argument of norms, right? It's like one argument about why ASEAN is the way it is because the government started out agreeing to just behave in a certain way to pretend that was what they all agreed upon. But behind closed doors, wink wink, nudge nudge, we know really it's not really about this. It's really just about keeping each other in power, right? ASEAN is fundamentally an elite club to prop up regimes. But they have to publicly give a different rhetoric about, ASEAN, it's about shared values, norms, whatever. Today they started to talk about, this all these different pillars. But the constructivist argument says that the mere behavior of, doing this public rhetoric has changed ASEAN itself in the decades since it was founded, right? Now, of course, this is not a perfect argument, it's got flaws, right? And it's been shown by Lee Jones, the guy who wrote the open letter, that the constructivist argument is heavily flawed. But there is also something to it, right? It is part of the explanation. And I think in Singapore, and this comes back to why I push so hard, for people to participate, Kirsten and I push so hard for people to participate in the select committee. Behaving in a certain way establishes expectations, and those expectations then become harder and harder to overcome. And so I think a lot of it is also, let's not act with fear, right? Let's act with love and hope. Let's act as if we are in a democracy. So for myself, right, when I've got all these smears against me, all these attacks, all these outrageous things said about me, I thought about it and I was like, well, if I lived in a democracy, with freedom of speech, right, people would have the right to say all these things about me. And you know what? That's what I want. So it's okay. These are just words. Words can't hurt me. If people disagree with me, that's fine. If people want to call me names, that's fine. That's the society that I believe in, right? Because there's no damage against me. No one's tried to assault me. No one's, filed a police report. No one's tried to throw me in jail, right? So it's fine, right? So we have to live what we believe. And yeah, so I would come back to you and go, what do you believe? Fight for that. What are you good at? Fight for that, right? And you know, new narrative was my way of doing that. Which, if I can just include a plug, we actually have membership forms at the back. They only $70 right, for a year's membership.
I was going to say that if you want to do your part, start by supporting New Narrative or TOC. I think Terry is here as well.
Yes.
Do that because the free press is very important. We're already so hamstrung. There's so little space for debate, discussion. People are scared. Start by doing that and then try to not be so scared. And then maybe you'll get somewhere. But there's a point that I wanted to bring up. You said that you're not in jail, no one's tried to hurt you. One of the things that struck me about the select committee hearing, and it wasn't your session actually, it was Kirsten, was when Thum said to her, yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. Does everyone remember that? Yeah. What do you make of that? What do you make of that, Kirsten?
You should ask Kirsten.
Yeah.
I think I was very surprised that I was not surprised that he might have been thinking it. I was surprised that he said it. I think some have, like, you know, thinking about it, he could maybe have been joking. But then again, if you're in that party and if you're in government, you don't get to make jokes like that. Only my friends get to make jokes like that because we are all equally like, Solan can say that to me as much as she wants and that's fine, but Thum doesn't get to say that to me. So I think that really is actually a major problem. So when I've spoken to people and I say, yes, there's no press freedom, there are issues with press freedom and freedom of expression in Singapore, a lot of the times the reply I get is, but nothing's happened to you. And I always tell them there's a difference between nothing happening to you because the government respects freedom of expression and nothing happening to you because they haven't done it yet. And I think that's actually what leads to a lot of self-censorship because people are worried about what's the yet that has not yet come.
There's a question in the back there.
I can just speak in general. I think there's one thing I'm really concerned about with regards to fake news. It's not a very popular opinion at all. But I don't think Singapore is a very equal society in terms of whether people have critical thinking skills or not. And a lot of time I see a lot of these online Facebook groups that propagate a lot of absolute nonsense. That at least to a discerning Singaporean, you can tell this absolute, this is crap, really. But when I speak to Singaporeans myself in my everyday life and I ask them all these things, and I can see that they are sort of like, you know, subconsciously tuning into all this nonsense. But I mean, it's like preaching to the choir. Like people like ourselves, we know that a lot of these things is clearly not true. But if we let this, you know, freedom of speech go on by these people preaching all this nonsense, then your swing voters start to think that this is true, and then they keep voting for the PAP because they think that's true, whereas, you know, it's all fake news, really.
Well, I actually feel that, okay, first of all, this is not just Singapore, right? It's true everywhere. It's really busy lives, people have so much to do, we only have so much mental capacity. It's a you know, human failing that we put things in neat boxes to make our lives easier, how we think about the world easier, right? But I feel that it is better to have all these diversity of voices, and I have faith in humanity that if you let people speak, that moderate, reasonable voices, there's a lot more moderate, reasonable voices out there which then are able to emerge, right? In a scenario, in a situation that we have right now of heavy censorship, you know, the people who are moderate are afraid to speak out, I think, and you end up getting a lot of extremism because of the nature of how we are censored. So that's one thing. But another thing is, you know, does it really translate into real world impact? You know, I have had so many attacks on me in the past month. I feel that, you know, in spite of that, the positive support that I received has way outweighed the negativism. And then in the real world, I have only received positive support. And even to the point, of course, random strangers just coming up to me, shaking my hand in all sorts of very strange places sometimes. At the doctor. But so I think I have faith in Singaporeans. When you see like some really abhorrent thing happening, people online respond to condemn it, right? You don't see like then this movement online, oh yes, this is true, we should support this, and in general, I think don't mistake a lack of action for this minority views for the majority, and I think I just have a lot of faith in Singapore. So if we just allow them to speak, I think the moderation, the tolerance, the mutual respect, the knowledge that we're a country where everyone's packed in, that we come from all over, all of that impacts how we live. We're a very open, globalized society. People are very accepting and tolerant here. I think that will show if we just lift all this fear and censorship.
There's a question there.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether this has been asked before in a fake news committee, but I really do question the legitimacy of the fake news community. And the reason for this is because when the committee was formed, the MP for Hougang actually came up with the audit report and said that the chairman of the committee actually during the GE 2015 said that WP could not account for $22 million from Punggol East thinking fund in that fund. So the thing was that after the audit was over and everything was proven to be accounted for, the chairman of the committee, I think he needs to answer for why the flyer came out under his name during the GE, which said that 22 million was unaccounted for when WP took over the council. So if no one had actually questioned this, I think that it's a very shocking development because it really throws light on the legitimacy, and it really questions the legitimacy of this committee when this thing happened and no one has actually answered for it, not even the committee chairman himself, Charles Tong.
So that goes back to the question of what we can all do, and if you feel strongly that this is something that he has to answer for, then ask him the question. Ask him. Don't wait for anyone else to ask him. Ask him.
I think it also goes back to the point about what happens, I'm not saying this is in this scenario, but in general, if it's when governments weaponize fake news, when they have control of these laws, and this is the big issue, I think, that they're the ones, governments are the ones with resources to really push through all sorts of fake news, right? So theoretically, this is, I think this is the biggest issue.
If you belong to the generation of 1987, you start hearing about foreigners interfering, then you think of, oh my gosh, after 31 years, it goes back to stories of American affairs and conspiracies. It's so sad for Singapore. That's my first point. The second point that to comment, I think actually there's something positive out of this whole development because they are stripping themselves bare to reveal who they are and what they do. You see, from generation to generation, from 1974, Anwar time to 1987's Francis Xiao and 16th, when any person or group of persons is becoming a threat because they're very credible because of what they have to destroy at all costs. And yes, they have to destroy at all costs, even though they know that it will cause some damage, because in the mind, 30% or more people will always be against them. They just have to be 55%. So it doesn't matter if they embarrass themselves internationally or locally, as long as a good number believe in them. I think they've probably done the calculation. So my third point recently, this question of fake news is very scary. Malaysia just passed the law, And we have one incident of someone charged because he says the police is slow in taking action, and that is charged in the fake news. And now Dr. Mahathir says that he suspects that he's playing a sabotage, and then he says he's accused of fake news. You just imagine that when the fake news law is passed in Singapore, just imagine.
So you in our conversation previously, before you mentioned that, because of this creation of fake news with regard to 1987, the impact on Singapore was huge. A whole generation of activists, civil society activists was destroyed, and it took a really long time for it to re-emerge again.
Yep, that's true. Actually, I agree with you that I've seen what is happening today happened before. And it's kind of scary for me to realize that the Singapore government has not changed. They forget that in the past, it was Lee Kuan Yew, the Prime Minister, who was doing all that he wanted to do. From the 60s, whoever he once arrested is done. But today, I don't know why the Prime Minister has not said anything so far about the episode. And it's all, even Mr. Shanmugam himself doesn't say very much. He pushes to Janil Puthucheary, Charles Chong to do the work. And only yesterday I think he said something, but it was a repeat of what he had said before. I don't know what is happening. If they continue like that, it's of course very bad for Singapore. I wish that the policies of the government change for the better of the country. And it's crazy to destroy young people at the prime of their life. Every generation gets destroyed. And what are we? In future we cannot be depending on foreigners to help us live and survive in a harsh world. So I think their mentality is quite puzzling. Why cannot they accept opposing views? This is something that they should really think about and think clearly and make a drastic change. If they don't, then we will continue to be in this crazy way that we never grow. We are always so immature that we cannot take criticism. It will destroy the country one day. It's already 55 years since 1963. If they continue like that, we are in big trouble.
So you're a lot more pessimistic than PJ, for instance?
Well, I see a repeat of what has happened. But I say also that the young people are standing up. I mean, the fact that Ken is organizing this event with Function 8, I think it's a very good thing. And the fact that all of you are here is also very good, and you can speak freely, you can disagree, you can agree. I think this is a good sign that we have to have independent thinking. We cannot just live in fear. After all, we only go through life once. And if we are going to live in fear forever, it's the end of us. What's the point of living? We might as well leave the stage.
I guess at the back of everyone's mind, people are afraid to articulate this. Are we looking at another potential crackdown?
I actually hope not. But then the sign is actually quite bad. I mean, Jollivan has already got a High Court summons, a contempt of court summons. And he hasn't even finished his earlier problems of vandalism and unlawful assembly and all the whole works. And here he's slapped with another summons. All my friends are saying that 1987 crackdown won't happen. And at the back of my mind, I always remember Dr. Lim Hock Siew saying that the ISA will be used as a last resort. I don't think we have reached this stage of them having to use the ISA. But if this had happened this is exactly, even I think in 87, we didn't even come to this stage, but they took us all in. and destroy one generation of people who have different ideas. I hope it won't happen, but I cannot guarantee.
Any other question?
With this issue of fake news, I'm more interested in how that's influencing public discourse. So, PJ, you've been on the receiving end of troll attacks before, right? Was it any different this time? And did the term fake news change the dynamics of that in any way?
That's a very interesting question. Never thought about it that way. I don't think any of the attacks on me used the term or called me or what I do fake news. Of course, I wasn't paying close attention to the majority of the attacks, but it feels like the line of the attack is, continues to be ad hominem attacks on my person, on me, on my credibility, and fake news is more of a term, an updated term for propaganda or just simply lies or something like that. I don't feel that it's been very, very different. Of course, the intensity this time has been significantly higher, but I don't think it's been. But that's a very interesting question. Yeah, I'll think about that.
Okay, thank you.
He talks about how Singaporeans, he talks about how Singaporeans are pretty okay with liberal ideas not being realized if their liberal views are realized. So how do you suggest we can change that? Both from your specific positions in civil society and for all of us.
Would you like to repeat the question?
I can't hear.
I guess I hear that as a population, because we are so, we become so comfortable in neoliberal society that we are okay to watch the people who are willing to raise a flag get burned. And that is a sacrifice that as a society we have become used to accepting. Well, I guess, do you agree with that? And is there anything we can do to change it if you do?
Well, okay, I mean, Baekwat has his view and, there's a lot for it. I guess I can also point out that on page 109, I think, he predicts that there will be no interest in talking about Operation Cold Store by the government or by the public ever again. So some of what he's predicted has turned out to be not true. But okay, that's nitpicking. I think from my point of view, right, it's not really an issue about liberalism or whatever our sort of guiding ideology is. Right, my position is that for a society to collectively decide what we believe, right, in a fair way, there has to be accountability by the government, there has to be transparency in our processes, and there has to be a free and fair way for us to select our government and renew the government and choose between all these different competing ideas. Right? Once you have a free and fair system where you have a government that is accountable, that can be held accountable, that everything is very clear and transparent, you build up trust in the system, then and only then can we collectively decide what our shared values are as a society, especially in a way that protects minorities, right? People who don't share those values. What that is, I am not really fussed, right? The more important thing is how we get there. And that's what I'm focused on. And that's what I want to achieve. So liberalism, if it's not liberal, if collectively we want to be a conservative society, then okay, I will keep fighting for a more progressive, accepting, tolerant society. But as long as I have trust that this system is fair and that we are, there will be there's accountability and transparency, then of course I'm going to be on the wrong, on the losing side of the debate, very often. That's democracy.
I think most people, not only in Singapore, don't want to think too much. They have too much to do already in life. And in Singapore, people work very hard. They hold 2 jobs, 1 job overtime, 3 jobs. So there's really no time to think and spare. Only the minority would be foolish enough or wise enough to think what will happen to the country. I think in any society there will always be a minority. And then when the minority gets somewhere, then the majority might come in and join. So we may be the trailblazers. Yeah. Okay.
Question at the back.
Yes.
Yes. Question for you. Yes. We do know that the government of the PAP has not. Sorry, yeah. We do know that the government of the PAP has not until yet. But what some observers might say is that there probably could be an ongoing fake news operation against you in how you've been portrayed as some kind of mastermind on one hand and a stooge on the other hand who sets up various companies with other people on one hand and gets money from George Soros from the other hand. And I'm afraid the layman, a lot of lay people just don't know what to make of it, especially when they are not told what on earth happened first, what is the sequence of events. Like Kirsten mentioned earlier during the panel session, the Open Society Foundation decided at one point, requested in fact, not to be revealed so soon that it was funding the UK entity that we set up. Yeah. But that still makes it very mysterious as to what happened first and what was the sequence and what was the thinking behind all the decision makers involved. Would you like to answer that?
So do you want me to answer the broader theoretical point or the specific point about the sequence?
People.
Okay. The sequence is pretty straightforward, I think. Well, it's straightforward to me. I was part of it because we want to set up new narrative, and we see it as a platform for Southeast Asia, and we're looking for grants, and we applied to grants. We're applying to all sorts of different places, and Open Society came back first. And that was a long, drawn-out sequence. So I think we applied quite good. When was it now? Definitely last year. But we didn't actually get it till the first tranche of the money. So the contract wasn't signed until late February, and the first tranche of the money didn't come in until 16th of March, right? And then we had our rejection 11th of April. So there was barely any time. And of course, between the 16th of March and the 11th of April, we were all very busily engaged with the select committee. So there was that. But we did tell our members at our open meeting at the end of March quite excitedly, hey, we've got this grant, it's fantastic. So that's the basic sequence. So if some people have implied like the money came in before we started, which is not true. We actually haven't even spent any of the money from the grant because the support of Singaporeans and other people around the world has been, we're up to like 19, 20 countries now. We've got, 450 or so members. The support has been fantastic. So we actually haven't needed to spend anything from the grant yet. But of course, eventually we will. It's very expensive.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Have you ever met George Soros?
No.
Has he ever communicated with you?
No.
Has he ever gotten anyone to communicate any message from him to you?
From him to no. I mean, I only talk to the people in his foundation. I don't even get to talk to like the director level or the deputy director level. I talk to this really low level bureaucrat. Who, 75,000 is nothing for them, right? When they said, okay, we'll give you a small amount of money to start, And I was like, a small amount of money? And then they said, yeah, 75,000. I was like, wow, that's a small amount of money. Right? But that's not even a year's budget for us, right? We still have to raise a lot of money. And it's only 1 year and, yeah. So, yeah, no, I don't think I've seen pictures of Soros, but if he walked down the street at me, I don't think I'd recognize him.
Wait, he wouldn't recognize you?
Oh, yeah, no. This is George Soros. I mean, he's got a massive company and, stuff to run.
Because the Open Society Foundation funds a lot of organizations. I went online to check, and it funds like Harvard College, NYU, Johns Hopkins University. It funds YWCA. I got a grant from not Open Society Foundation, but a Sundance grant to make a documentary, and Sundance is funded by by a fund with a grant from a George Soros related foundation. So this whole thing about, if you get a grant from a Soros Foundation, that means you are a puppet of George Soros. I think it's quite a stretch. Lots of people get grants from, Soros-related foundations. I just wanted to make that point.
I mean, is every scholar, from government scholar, a puppet of the government? When I got the Rhodes Scholarship, right, I got half a page in the Straits Times. Oh, Singaporean gets Rhodes Scholarship. Nobody said, oh, Singaporean funded by, foundation set up by horrible colonialists who sought to conquer Southern Africa to find diamonds. Because that's what Rhodes was a very nasty man, right? He conquered Southern Africa to enrich himself, and in his will he set up the Rhodes Scholarships to create what he saw as to educate the best, brightest people in the colonies in Oxford, turn them into British people so that we can send them back and they can govern these colonies on behalf of the British Empire. And he specifically included America and Germany so that those eventually, right, if we're educating all the best and brightest in Oxford, they'll slowly be absorbed into the British Empire too. Right? So, I mean, nobody said, you're becoming a puppet of this horrible imperialist or his trustees today. It's the same thing. We're going to apply for a lot more grants, I can tell you that. Right? There's a whole bunch of German foundations that fund, journalism and free speech around the world, right? And American ones as well. I mean, this is not going to stop us because we believe in what we do, and we believe in Southeast Asia and in creating this platform for Southeast Asia.
I wanted to add something in response to Simon's question about how this select committee thing has kind of affected the discourse. So I've seen a lot of trolling, but this time I find it particularly ironic that it's this select committee on deliberate online falsehood that has triggered the most bonkers trolling I've ever seen since I started in 2010. I've seen a lot of trolling about death penalty and stuff, and that's fairly straightforward. People are angry about me being anti-death penalty, but yesterday I was looking at all the comments on my Facebook page, and it's what the hell is going on? I don't know who is the pro-PAP side, the anti-PAP side anymore. Everybody is just upset, and clearly we're going to have problems defining fake news because sarcasm cannot be detected because people were jumping on other people who are actually being sarcastic, and then this whole thing was exploding. And so if we can't even deal with sarcasm or people who are just making small comments, and how are we going to deal with fake news? I look at everything that's happening on my Facebook pages, Twitter's page, everything. I don't see how any form of legislation could actually solve that, because if you took anyone down, there will be this bigger uproar about someone taking someone down. Then that's another conspiracy about censorship. But I don't see how we could deal with that apart from more discussion and more media literacy.
I think to answer your broader theoretical point, as a historian, I guess maybe it gives me a bit of different perspective, but the truth always comes out in the end, and you gotta have faith in humanity, and I think no matter what people say today, the truth will be known eventually, and the most important thing is to just don't be an asshole, right? We can all have different beliefs, but just be kind and nice to one another. We have no idea how it's impossible to predict the future. So the most important thing is to be kind and nice to one another, and I have faith in people, and I think when future historians write, if this is even historiographically worthy in 50 or 100 years, when they write about it, they will know what happened, they will see what happened, they will see how people behave, and they will make their judgments accordingly, and I have faith in that.
We have time for 2 last questions.
Just want to make a couple of observations. I think I agree, PJ, that I agree with Paul that there's a bigger picture, and I agree that in the long run, truth hopefully will prevail. And I agree that we should treat each other with respect and kindness. But I think what helps a lot are the right kinds of institutions. I think we're talking about what are the institutional things, the bigger picture, that can really help resolve the tension and the division that fake news, and in this case, fake news legislation policy. And to me, it may seem like a motherhood statement, but it seems to me that there are 3 important institutions that we could do well to improve on. Not that I'm saying we don't have it. I'm saying that it really needs to be there very strongly and presently for these things to happen in a positive way. First of all is, of course, access to official information. So some kind of public information act, access public, would certainly help find out, resolve what is fake and what is not, right? Secondly, I think a free press, right? A free mainstream media, a free online media would certainly help speed up the resolution of what is fake and what is not fake, as opposed to having to, throw the colonial records 30 years later, right? And thirdly, I think it's very important that given that this is a piece of legislation, that there be both legal redress for harm from fake news by government, as well as independent courts, right? So not to put too fine a point on it, we're talking about arrest under ISA. I note with a bit of irony that our neighbors, the Malaysians, for all we say about their failed democracy, there was a successful case that was ruled against the government in favor of ISA detainees that resulted, I believe, in a compensation of about 300,000 ringgit to the parties detained, right, in Malaysia. So, the law itself can be used to protect people from fake news against governments, right? If the proper jurisprudence and design is put into it. So, these institutions, protection for citizens against applications of government, whether fake news or otherwise.
Did you have a question?
No, I'm just expressing opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone want to respond to that? Casey?
Yeah, I think the interesting, frankly, when I talk here about fake news, is my eyes and my mind glazes over because it's such a complex and prevalent issue. Fake news is another word for disinformation or misinformation or propaganda. It has been going for time immemorial. But I suppose for countries that want to legislate a fake news law, the critical question, and this essentially has been said before, is does this law apply to everyone? And in particular, how does this law apply to the government? Normally, laws that are made apply to everyone, because that's where the term "no one is above the law" comes in. However, for example, in MINDEF, you cannot sue MINDEF as a national serviceman. So laws, civil suits do not apply to MINDEF, and that's the law, right? So the question is, if we have a fake news law, will the government say, oh, by the way, this applies to everyone but to us? You cannot sue the government for fake news. And this is a very real possibility, which essentially, you want to talk about this issue seriously, you must say, hey, by the way, this fake news law, it must apply to you as well. So that's one. The point I just want to, and this is not meant to be a cheeky point, but in terms of foreign funding, the single largest donation that's received by the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy is $100 million by Li Ka-shing. Now, you know, I mean, Li Ka-shing is not Singaporean. He's a foreigner. He's probably sympathetic to China. And this is a school of public policy, you know. It teaches people how to do policy. Now, I don't think Li Ka-shing told the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy how his money should be used. But that's the point. I mean, donations are, like George Soros' Open Foundation, are intended to do good. So perhaps also the other thing is we assume and accept too readily that any foreign funding is bad, whereas that should be questioned as well.
Do you want to respond to that? So yeah, I mean, the two of you raised the same point, basically, that the law, if there is a law, has to apply to the people in power as much as it applies to us.
And just to add a point, contempt of court, right, is not applicable to the government.
Contempt of court is not applicable to the government. So we want the government to be held accountable as they hold us accountable. Okay, on that note, thank you very much for coming today, and I want to thank PJ and Solang for
Thank you very much. I just want to say I'm holding on to the new narrative subscription for anybody good and for me or my colleague. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.